Welcome! In this series of short videos, we will look at topics for the PowerBasic Windows compiler. Today we will look at a library for embedding a browser control in a dialog. In this series of videos I'll be covering the creation and use of libraries. So you might ask, why use libraries? Why not just write code whenever you need it? Well, if you're writing a lot of applications, having common libraries that contain functionality that you use often will save you time, both coding and testing. It will also make your code more readable and therefore maintainable, which is always a good thing. In preparation for today's video, I prepared a very simple dialog. This dialog has only 4 controls on it. It has a text box into which a URL can be typed or pasted. It has an image button to allow you to browse to the hard disk of your computer and select an HTML file, which when the open is clicked, it will display it in the text box. And the final button is a button to display the HTML page. And what we're going to do today is we're going to embed an HTML browser on the actual dialog. So when this display the HTML page button is clicked, a browser control will be populated. To give us a pre-built HTML file, I've created a demo listing HTML file with a subfolder which has our cascading style sheet and graphics logo in it. If we just double click on the HTML, we'll see what we expect to get. This should appear inside our browser. So let's look at the code to see what we need to do. The first thing we need to do with our code is to add our library. This is our library, pb.html.include. We'll just load that one up to have a look at it. We'll come back to this library later once we've actually demoed the code. So now that we've added the library to our source code, we'll need to create a constant to define our browser control. And we've created one called idocx with a value of 8000, just to keep it clear of all the other IDs. If we now go to the dialog itself, in this dialog we have all the controls in the PB form section. And outside the PB form section, we have a line of code to set the image on the image button. So how can we easily add our browser to this dialog? We're going to create 4 local variables. One for height, one for width, one for the X starting coordinate, and one for the Y starting coordinate. We're then going to use the dialog getSize command to determine the size of our current dialog. Having determined the size of the dialog, we can now do a bit of basic arithmetic to work out where best to position our embedded browser control on the dialog itself. So we're positioning it 10 dialog units in and 50 down from the top. And then we're working out the height and the width of our browser control based on these numbers. So to minimize the amount of coding you have to do, there's a macro. Prep.html will embed in this dialog all the code you need to display our embedded browser control. So since this is a dialog setup, let's have a look at the event handler, the callback function itself. The callback function is the place where all your code resides that handle the events that are triggered by the user on the dialog. At the moment, we have an event called idAbort, which allows the dialog to end. This is when the user clicks on the exit button. We also have a default button, which is the display button to display our web page. This is where we're going to put our code. Currently, when the button is clicked, we're doing a control get to extract from the text box the value that's in there. This is going to be our URL. The first validation check we'll need to put in there is to make sure that the URL itself is not empty. We're then going to call another function in our library called populate.html. This takes 3 parameters: the dialog handle, the string which is our URL, and the handle to the embedded browser control. And this function will then display in that control our web page. Now this could in theory be a web page which is a local file, an HTML file, or it could indeed be an online web page somewhere on the web. However, the embedded browser control is not a fully functional browser, it has limitations. But as a mechanism for doing simple reporting in HTML format, this is absolutely ideal. So now that we've got that code in place, let's try running it. So we click on the button to browse for a HTML page, open it up, and then click Display the HTML page button. And our text file, which is HTML, is now displayed in the embedded browser. Note that it has scaled the web page to fit in the browser control itself, just like you would do in an ordinary browser. As I said, this embedded browser control is not a fully functional browser. However, it can be used to display this kind of information. So this code can quite easily display an HTML page inside your dialog. So now that we've displayed this HTML page, let's have a look at the library itself. In the library, there is one function and one macro. The macro prep HTML puts the code inside your dialog creation routine. This declares a few local variables, calls the initialization routine to initialize the libraries we're going to be using, and then adds the control at the location that you have specified. The populate HTML takes three parameters: the dialog handle, the string which is our URL we wish to actually display in the embedded browser control, and the handle to that embedded browser control. This routine quite simply converts the dialog handle to a full Windows handle to allow these extra functions to be called which are inside one of the Windows libraries. And the final action is to navigate to our URL, which will display it inside the browser control. So using this library and the embedded browser control, it's a very easy way to get functional reporting within your application with a minimal amount of work. Hopefully you'll find this useful in your own applications. But that's it for today. Thank you for watching.